London, the 5th of April, 2020. For 3 long weeks, the coronavirus has brought the streets of the British capital to a standstill and enveloped the kingdom. During her 68-year reign, the Queen of the United Kingdom has only intervened on television 4 times. This was to be a rare, historic and solemn speech. That evening, as night fell, Elizabeth II addressed her people.
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time. A time of disruption in the life of our country. Together we are tackling this disease, and I want to reassure you that if we remain united and resolute, then we will overcome it. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
The next morning, a glimmer of hope shone over London. 24 million British people had watched the speech on television. There were record viewing figures around the Commonwealth too, from Australia to Canada. And in Europe, several million people had tuned in to hear the Queen's message. Such is the mysterious power of this unique modern-day monarch. And yet, at the age of 94, Elizabeth II had just lived through one of the worst years of her reign. The pandemic was the finale of a long drama. She almost lost her husband, Prince Philip. She got caught up in an unprecedented political crisis. She had to renounce her son, Andrew, when he was suspected of sexual abuse. She saw her grandson, Harry, and his wife, Meghan, go into voluntary exile in America. Ruptures, scandals, Brexit, and loneliness. But Her Majesty remained unshakable, impervious, and unfailing throughout. This is the story of Elizabeth II's last battles.
The Duke of Edinburgh has been involved in a car accident near the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. Prince Philip, who is 97, is not injured. Our royal correspondent Nick Witchell is with me now. Tell us what we know, Nick.
This happened at about 3:30 this afternoon on the A149, close to the Sandringham estate. The Duke, who was driving himself, was pulling out of a driveway when there was a traffic accident involving another vehicle. The Range Rover that the Duke was driving turned over. According to an eyewitness, the Duke was conscious, but he was very, very shocked and shaken.
When she was informed of the accident, for a moment, Elizabeth II thought that she had lost the love of her life, this unwavering companion who had been her only refuge for over 70 years. This was a recurring nightmare. The Queen had been trying to persuade her husband to give up driving for some time. Would this accident finally convince him? Not at all. 2 days later, a photographer for the Mail on Sunday, one of the most powerful British tabloids, caught Prince Philip on camera behind the wheel of a new Land Rover. And, what's more, he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He had reoffended.
Not only did he drive out of Sandringham House where the photograph was taken 2 days afterwards, he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He was a man who'd caused a very dangerous car accident with 2 women and a baby in the back of the car. It looked as if he just didn't give a damn. And frankly, knowing what we know of Prince Philip, I don't think he did.
This time, the Queen's husband was forced to hand his driving licence over to the police. Was that the end of it? Not really. Since the law permits it, the very next day, Philip got behind the wheel of another vehicle, and carried on driving around the grounds of his castle. While her husband continued dicing with death, Elizabeth II returned to her duties as Queen, as if nothing had happened. A visit to RAF Marham in Norfolk, handshakes for the men, and warm smiles for the female officers. Mission accomplished, as usual. What is the Queen thinking about as she leaves the airbase? She gives nothing away. No one really knows what goes on in the Queen's head, and yet, every evening for the past 70 years, she has kept a diary which every historian in the land fantasizes about reading. We can only imagine what it might contain. That evening, despite her husband's recent accident, no doubt the Queen wrote a few simple, factual sentences. The words of a conscientious, industrious queen pin of the royal family, devoid of inner torture or soul-searching.
I think the Queen has feelings, but the Queen was born into this strange life where she never really had a private life. So she was brought up believing in duty, believing that she didn't have the luxury of her own feelings. She spent her whole life suppressing her emotions, hiding her emotions from herself, I think, as well as from other people.
The second chapter of this drama begins just days after Prince Philip's accident. Still on the hunt for juicy tidbits, the British Red Tops came up with another spicy morsel to sink their teeth into: the Princesses' Duel. According to the tabloids, a furious row was unfolding behind the walls of Kensington Palace, where the wives of the Queen's grandsons, Princes William and Harry, both lived. Meghan had got rid of all the staff. Kate couldn't deal with the fact that her sister-in-law had fired her loyal servants. Kate, the epitome of discretion. Meghan, the hysteric. Spot the misfit.
Stories come out of her, some would say, difficult behaviour. There were stories that Meghan didn't really want to do things that, as the royals had done before. There was nicknames for her in the palace. Me again, because it was all about her. And I think public opinion was starting to turn. She was this divorcee American woman actress who come in and stolen a Prince of England.
Meghan Markle came from another world. She was American, an actress, divorced, not to mention mixed race and a feminist.
I'm a California girl, born and raised, so the flip-flop culture is part of just who I am. I love my cutoffs and flip-flops and being as relaxed as can be.
Oblivious to the prejudices, Elizabeth II was convinced that the transition from Hollywood to Buckingham Palace was possible, and that the arrival of this emancipated, modern woman would give the British monarchy a much-needed facelift. To boost the image of the firm, the Queen, the day after her grandson's wedding, took Meghan with her to the county of Cheshire, north of Liverpool, to take her first steps as a member of the royal family. The American actress and the British monarch seemed to be hitting it off.
Despite her age and her heritage, the Queen is a real moderniser, and she knows how to stay relevant. And she knew that embracing this new, very glamorous, very diverse character made the monarchy more relevant to more people, and that was good for the monarchy.
The British tabloids may have chosen to take issue with Meghan, but Elizabeth II wasn't wrong. The British youth applauded this modern princess who challenged outdated traditions. It was as if history was repeating itself. Quarter of a century after the death of Diana, the United Kingdom once again witnessed the arrival of a princess with a difference, one who was independent and rebellious. Diana meekly endured the diktats of the royal protocol for years before she finally asserted herself. Meghan was much quicker off the mark. Prince Harry's wife broke with the long-held tradition of all royal pregnancies becoming public affairs. When the time came, Meghan spurned the royal family's preferred clinic and gave birth on the quiet in a relatively unknown hospital in central. And after the birth of Archie, this mixed-race princess ignored the sacrosanct ritual usually bestowed upon every new young prince. Traditionally, he would be presented to his royal subjects via the media as soon as he left the maternity ward. One of the reasons Harry and Meghan refused to introduce their son Archie to the public was doubtless this tweet posted by BBC News presenter Danny Baker, just hours after his birth. It was the culmination of latent racism shown towards the couple in the media and on the web.
I know that Meghan and Harry perceived a lot of racism, particularly in the commentary and the columns in British newspapers.
When you see headlines like Straight Out of Compton and talking about her exotic DNA, yes, I mean, Straight Out of Compton was wrong. It was factually wrong. And describing someone's DNA as exotic is separating them. So, yes, perhaps there has been racist undertones in the coverage.
In the past, I think the tradition would be to ignore that sort of stuff, but they refused to accept that, and they would block accounts. They would spend a lot of time looking at trolls online and trying to prevent them from spreading their hate.
A fortnight after the birth, on his grandmother Elizabeth II's insistence, Harry finally introduced his newborn son to the voracious lenses of the royal press.
Congratulations. Thank you.
But if certain reactionaries in the kingdom were impatient to find out whether Archie looked more like his mother or his father, or to put it bluntly, whether he was black or white, they might as well have spared themselves the trouble.
Who does he take after? Does he look like anyone?
We're still trying to figure that out.
Everyone says that babies change so much over 2 weeks. We're basically sort of monitoring how the changing process happens over this next month, really. But his looks are changing every single day.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Can we have a little peek at him? Just can't quite see his face. Wow.
This was a skeleton service. The rift seemed final. That evening, alone in her room, the Queen must have felt anxious. Meghan had failed to understand that being a member of the royal family meant making sacrifices. These conventions could serve as armor rather than censure once you worked out how to use them to your advantage. Her grandson's wife reminded her so much of the Princess of Wales. She was radiant and generous, just like Diana. She loved being in the spotlight, but hated being photographed by the press, just like Diana. The Queen sent up a prayer, remembering her daughter-in-law's divorce and brutal death. Dear God, spare me another tragedy. The Queen's Gambit was foundering, but the soap opera wasn't over yet. A new perilous chapter began 10 days later. On the 24th of July 2019, former London Mayor and Conservative Party troublemaker Boris Johnson paid Elizabeth II a visit for his first private audience as the new Prime Minister. During her 67-year reign, this was the 14th Prime Minister the Queen had received, and nothing had changed, with bowing and scraping from one side and diplomatic smiles from the other, as usual.
Elizabeth II has always kept her distance from government leaders. She has never become friends with any of them. She belongs to a world which has no use for politicians. As far as she is concerned, they are birds of a feather, whether left-wing or right-wing. She puts up with them, safe in the knowledge that such is the life of politics, that they will come and go, whereas she will always be there.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson does not govern by consensus and compromise. He has a rough-and-ready approach to achieving his goal, which is to leave the European Union as soon as possible. He plans to get the country out of the stalemate it has been stuck in for the past 3 years. The day after his audience with the Queen, in his first speech to the British Parliament, Bojo goes in, all guns blazing.
Our mission is to restore trust in our democracy and fulfil the repeated promises of Parliament to the people by coming out of the European Union and doing so on October the 31st.
Confronted by a hostile Parliament, Boris Johnson simply bulldozes his way through.
The great Brexit divide that started off as Leave versus Remain is finally coming down tonight to government versus Parliament, with the people and the Queen caught somewhere in the middle. To cheers from his supporters and howls of outrage from opponents, the Prime Minister announced this morning that he was suspending Parliament for longer than usual.
In the hours following the announcement of the suspension of Parliament, thousands of anti-Brexit demonstrators converge on central London. They accuse Boris Johnson of having taken the Queen hostage in a hostile takeover. Indeed, it was Elizabeth II who signed the decree, which is both her prerogative and her duty.
Boris Johnson said, I want to prorogue Parliament. I wish you to just sign the document of prorogation, and the Queen signed it. Constitutionally, the Queen is guided and advised by her Prime Minister and her ministers. Now, if her ministers say it is okay, she has to accept that. That is our constitution.
The Queen never feels manipulated by politicians. They all try to manipulate her, but she doesn't let herself be manipulated. If she had said to Johnson, listen, this decree is intolerable, Johnson might have amended it. But she clearly didn't do that.
While there was turmoil on the streets of London, and the political classes were debating her role, active or otherwise, in this unprecedented suspension of Parliament, the Queen took a trip 400 miles north to her holiday home in Scotland, Balmoral Castle. On the agenda were bagpipes and the stroking of ponies. But behind Her Majesty's silence, some people detected a deeply held conviction. What if, in her heart of hearts, Elizabeth II was actually a Brexiteer?
She is a country girl at heart, who is secretly suspicious of the pro-European stance of the metropolitan elite. After all, she is head of the Commonwealth, her extended family overseas. In her eyes, the destiny of the United Kingdom lies more with those former colonies and ex-dominions than with the European Union. For all that, the Queen seems to me to be pro-Brexit, although she has never actually said so.
I would never guess what the Queen is thinking, whether she's pro or anti-Brexit. Nobody will really know what her thoughts are about it, because she will not talk about it for fear of it getting out. And getting out then causes a constitutional crisis, and she's not in the business of creating constitutional crisis.
But despite Elizabeth II wanting to avoid it at all costs, the constitutional crisis was a reality. And in London, some of the demonstrators also thought the Queen knew exactly what she was doing when she signed the decree muzzling the anti-Brexit Parliament. In mid-September, the Supreme Court, the country's highest judicial body, settled this toxic debate.
The decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson had broken the law by asking for the suspension of Parliament. It was unprecedented in the modern history of the United Kingdom. The ball was in the Queen's court, and it was against her religion to intervene in politics.
She may have been put in a position where she had to choose an alternative prime minister, or the leader of the opposition would have said, you have to appoint a different government or sack that prime minister. And that would have been the worst case scenario for her. She wouldn't have wanted to get involved.
3 weeks later, at the Palace of Westminster, the Queen's speech was ceremoniously delivered. Elizabeth II had not changed Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's head did not roll. Every year, in accordance with royal protocol, the monarch, dressed in all her finery, opens the parliamentary session, reading out her Prime Minister's programme to some 650 MPs and peers.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's priority has always been to secure the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union on the 31st of October.
On that day last year, Elizabeth II looked to be having a particularly bad day, her brows knitted in a frown and a grumpy expression on her face. The Queen seemed to be weary of all the conflict and intrigue that were inherent to her role, not to mention the unpopularity that went along with that.